Hi everybody! Today we're going to be doing a color pencil realism piece, and if you're new to this video, go ahead and check out my introduction to drawing and drawing pencil realism videos. They're the first two videos that I did, and they really explain my method and how I personally approach drawing. If you decided to skip those because you feel like you're already at an advanced level, just keep in mind that I'm not necessarily doing this in a conventional way. I'm just showing you how I personally create the drawings that I create. I am using toned tan paper today. You can also use toned gray or white paper if that's what you have, because ultimately these techniques will apply to anything. I just really like the way that the color pencil pops off of the toned tan paper. The brand that I'm specifically using is this one, and I've used a couple different brands. I just happen to think this one is a great price and it's a great quality, and so I keep getting this one. And then I'm going to be using Prismacolor pencils. I have hundreds of Prismacolor pencils at this point, but just starting with your basic colors, your primary colors is fine, because I find that Prismacolor softcore color pencils kind of blend like paint, so you can definitely create different colors by layering the color pencil. I've pre-selected some colors that I kind of know I'll be using for today's eye drawing. We're doing the same eye as last time, but instead of doing it in pencil, we're doing it in color pencil, and we're going to be approaching it very differently. You won't need a regular pencil because we're going to start just straight in, and again, if you watch the first two videos, you'll kind of see that process is how I draw. I'm going to have my mechanical sharpener with me, and I've covered it with stickers a long time ago, so I can't really see the brand. I guess I could peel it off, but it's just a portable one that I got. It's super handy, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. I really think that you can draw at any age. I don't think it's something that you had to start young with, and personally, I don't think it's something that you're born with. I've been self-taught my entire life, and so I believe in you, and just take everything slowly. It's not a rush, and that's something that's really important. Everything that I'm doing, everyone moves at their own pace, and it's just important to make sure that your details are refined before you move on to the next step. I'm going to keep my reference image off to the side like last time, and again, I really want to encourage you, if you're new, to watch the previous two videos, because there are a bunch of tips that I gave that I don't want to repeat for this one, just so that for those that are following the series from the beginning, the video doesn't become too redundant. Okay, so we're going to start at the tear duct, and you'll notice in the reference image that there's not a lot of true blacks in the image besides the pupil, and kind of some of those shadowed areas are pretty dark, and unlike the pencil drawing that we did, the contrast is still very important, but it's going to be a little less dramatic as far as your blacks and your highlights go, but we're really going to be focusing on color for this. The real goal is to make sure that your proportions as we go along are as accurate as possible, and so is the light to dark shading. Okay, so like the last video, we're going to start with our little line. And if you watch the first video, it'll be the same thing. It's something that everyone's capable of doing, and we're just going to keep reinforcing that idea that nothing is more difficult. It doesn't matter that we're using color pencil, we're using all the same techniques. I'm just going to show you how I would break it down in my head and how I would get to that same place. So my first goal is to kind of block out that shape of the tear duct with the skin tone color pencil, and that's just to give me that overall shape. Again, we're not using pencil first because, for one, pencil tends to muddy up the color pencil as you're using it, and if you're going to line something out, use a very light tone, one that you can easily go over with another color pencil. Thankfully, with color pencils, especially these softcore, layering is actually possible, and so don't worry about little corrections. We're not going to use an eraser because if you've worked with color pencils before, you know that it's not usually a pleasant experience to erase color pencils. So if you make a mistake, don't worry, don't panic. You can just go over it with a different color when we get to it. So I'm going to block out that general tear duct shape. And we're going to use our critical eye, and we're going to look at the image and look at our shape, and before we move on, assess if we have a similar proportion to what we're looking at. And by doing that, we're looking at the curvature of this line, we're comparing it to the one in the photo, we're looking at the distance between, and we're just taking it little by little. We're not about to draw out the whole eye, we're just going to tackle this little tear duct first. And so I have this light color as a base. we're layering here. So we see in the photo that there's a lot of shading here, and we're gonna just do this whole little tear duct section and the skin around it. So just block it out with one color. I'm gonna grab kind of this pinkish color. It's pretty dark in this tear duct in the photo reference that I'm using. So I'm just going to go ahead and block out that outer edge. And as you can see in the photo, where this tear duct is, there's like this little tiny bump in the skin right there. And those are the kind of details that we're not going to skip over and that we're going to really use our eye for, because that's what gives us the most successful, realistic looking image that we can get. So I'm going to go ahead and shade those darker areas. Just like last time, we're using the same kind of shading techniques, but unlike before where you're using your hand pressure to really change, how light something gets, to create the richest tone and the most realistic tone, we're not going to be shading using dark to light. We're not going to, oh, that's a bat. That's a witch. Those are some lips. We are going to, as you can tell, I flip around a lot. We're not going to be shading by doing dark to light like we were doing with this is definitely a technique that you can use, and, right now I'm doing a color realism tutorial, and it's not to say that this is wrong, but just so that you can emulate what I'm doing, this is not how we would be shading from dark to light. We would be shading our dark colors, taking a lighter color pencil, or even white, but for the sake of showing what I would do here, taking that peachy color, and then shading the light into it. And these are little techniques that you can practice on a separate page if you don't feel super confident. And here's where we'll start to change the pressure of the pencil to get that gradient. So as you can see, that gives us a much more solid gradient versus this sort of almost like charcoal-y effect. And so we're not going to be doing this for this realism piece because we're trying to make it as close to the photo as we can get. And just using your critical eye, you can see that you're still seeing that tan tone through the color pencil, and you're also seeing it broken up a lot because you're not using the soft core is like a very rich and creamy when you actually use it and press down with it. So we're not utilizing it by doing very lightly. And even if you have like Crayola color pencils, if you apply pressure and apply it very thickly, you will get a more even tone. It is a little harder to layer something like Crayola because it's not a soft core, generally speaking, and the quality isn't quite as high, but there are other color pencil brands besides Prismacolor that give you that creamy texture. And this is the medium that I use the most and that I really advocate for. So back to the drawing. And if you notice, I kind of have that little gradient going on. It's me sort of blocking out those shapes as I go. I am going to thicken it once I'm sure of the marks that I'm making. But really this entire space, even if you colored that all completely in pink, which I'll do just to show you, even if I took this entire shape and colored it in solid, like the tear duct in the photo, I can then layer on all my light colors on top of it, including the, the darker tones that are in there. So I can take the color pencil and go in almost like you're painting. And that's what I really love about the color pencil medium, is that it kind of gives you the best of both worlds when it comes to drawing and painting. And so it's really a technique that's going to lend to both mediums. And once you're done with this, your confidence is totally going to change, especially if you're new to art and you're not used to creating something that you're really proud of. I guarantee that this will be a piece that you'd be very, very proud of. And so I'm going to shade there's like this little bit of lighter area. And what I love about doing color is, these values become so much more obvious when the color also changes. Whereas in black and white, you really, really have to be so much more meticulous about where you're putting darks and, your blacks and your whites, because that's the only color palette. So you really have to be paying attention to contrast. We still are paying attention to that, but it's a lot easier to pick it out when we're using color. And because, as you're seeing, I'm layering these colors on top, it doesn't matter if you go light to dark, dark to light, medium to dark, medium to light, you can always layer on top. So we're not going to move on from this area until we're sure that what we're looking at is as close to what we're seeing in the image as possible. Like I did last time, for the sake of time in the video, I'm going to kind of go quickly through things as I'm explaining them, but take as much time as you need on each section. I don't think you'll be able to follow along if this is your first time with every single step that I'm doing. So pause the video, play some music in the background, and then play it again when you're caught up. So don't rush. Kind of taking this black raspberry so that I'm not doing like a true black and going into some of these shadowed areas. There's definitely like some orangey tones in here too. Again, it doesn't matter how many different tones that you have. If you have an orangey tone and you don't have like an orangey red, take some yellow in there and add in some yellow to some areas, because that'll kind of give you that slightly oranger look. So remember, watch the first 2 videos if you feel lost, if you're wondering why I'm not doing an undersketch or why I'm, first doing this entire area before I move on. I really explain those things in detail. For the sake of trying to get the closest image possible, I take it one step at a time so my proportions are as accurate as possible. So as you can see in the photo, there is some like shading around the tear duct, and it kind of has this yellowish tone to it. And so I'm going to be mixing, as you'll notice as I go along, I mix, my tones as I'm going. It's kind of like that painterly effect. If you notice that your tear duct looks thinner than the one in the photo reference that you're using, don't keep moving on, because once one thing starts becoming off in proportion, the rest of the image will start to look off. So really take it slow, really check in and focus on your everything is comprised of little lines, and if you can do a stick figure, if everyone's confident and their ability to do that, and I hear that the most is, I can only draw stick figures. Well, if you're confident in that, just break everything down to little lines. You got this. A lot of people will also think that there's something to be said for color theory. They don't feel confident with their color choices, or they don't know if we're doing things in the same way. If you're just breaking out, everything's comprised of pixels. For proportion and for drawing's sake, I don't zoom in on the image, because it starts changing the size dimension of what you're looking at, and so naturally you'll draw it differently. Always keep your reference image the same size as you're drawing it. That shouldn't change. You shouldn't zoom in on it. Watch the first 2 videos, you'll understand that a lot more. But one thing you can zoom in for this specific thing is, if you're confused about color, zoom in a lot, and your pixels will become much more obvious, and you'll be able to see the yellows in here. And on my phone, I'm going to do it on screen as well, but if you zoom in, you will start to pick out the colors a little bit easier, and it's that whole idea of just look at what you're drawing, take the time, look at it, keep referring back to your reference, and really pick out those details before you keep drawing, because you can see it. For the sake of doing the video, I'm probably going to move through it a little bit quicker than I normally would, but we're still going to pay attention to the shapes that we're creating, make sure that they're accurate. There's this water line that we can see in our image, like where the tear duct is kind of clear and starts to fade into the eyeball. And we're going to make sure that each of those things, that everything looks spaced appropriately. Everything seems proportionate to the image that we're looking at. Because again, if you start out with proportions that are off and you're like, well, that looks good enough, and keep going, you can make it as close as possible, and it will give you an overall better image. Like I said before, the reason I love using tone tan paper and color pencil is that it gives you the mid-tone, and then you're adding highlight on top of it. And like I mentioned in the first video, we have all these highlights, these bright white highlights that are going to pop, and then most of the eyeball, even though it's white, it's not bright white. Like, there's shines that show truly what bright white is, and the rest of it's kind of like this grayish blue color. So I kind of have this grayish blue, which is even brighter still than the image, so I'm definitely going to go back in with gray and layer that. My highlight I'm just going to put on top of the color that I'm doing right now, because it is going to be bright white, but unlike pencil, we can actually put the highlights on top of the color, so it doesn't really matter what order that you do your shadow or highlights in. Before we move too far in that direction, we're going to be checking our proportions. Does this look like the correct width? Does all the dimensions seem pretty correct? I didn't go far out from the tear duct, but I will be doing this lid, so before I go too far over, I'm going to make sure I do this area. So we're making sure the distances between everything look accurate before we keep shading a particular area. And, you know, there's a lot of reds, yellows. There's never going to be one tone. Each section is always going to be comprised of like a ton of different colors. The more dimension and the more color depth that you have, the, you know, more realistic of an image that you're going to end up with. And if you are jumping into this video again, if this feels overwhelming to you, the pace that I'm moving at, or, you know, if you're not sure like how I'm accurately judging the distance of something, or you're not sure how you're supposed, if this feels at all overwhelming, go back, watch the other two. If you feel confident in those two videos and the steps we took, this should really be no different than shading with pencil. So we're starting to get this part of the image kind of fleshed out. I'm going to take my black and add in some contrast with this waterline, or for this lid line rather. And, you know, if you'll remember from the last video, it's really important to not just do a section or part of it and then keep moving on. You want to have like a certain area to work from and then continue to build on that area before you keep moving on. Because we could do the whole lid, but the lashes really help determine distance. Like, this actually should be a little wider because my lash has to go here, and then I'm noticing that this is way smaller than it should be. So even when I do too much before I actually add in the detail that's necessary there, I'll notice that my proportions are off, and I will always fix it before moving on, because that's how you get a successful image. Nothing in life will ever come from being complacent or not, you know, taking your time or having patience. So the same applies to drawing. If you see someone who's really good at art, I guarantee you that they're also just really patient. So as you can see, this distance looks a lot more true to the photograph. I just want to reinforce that that comes from reassessing and figuring out that there was space there that I wasn't accounting for, and going back and fixing it. For things like wrinkles, you know, if they seem, you know, a little less obvious than creating like a solid line where a shadow would be, it's because, you know, wrinkle isn't necessarily like a flat to flat edge, like it's kind of just the skin going in and back up. So you create kind of like a soft shaded line rather than like a hard line. All of the concepts that we're using today are going to apply to every single subject that you draw. Not one thing is going to be harder than something else if you're looking at a reference, because you're going to approach every single area the same way. You're just going to look at what you're looking at, the reference, and translate each little section as you go. You're not worried about the full thing at the start. When we did the tear duct, it probably didn't look like anything good was going to happen, but as we go on, you start to really realize that you're going to have a successful image. So long as you pay attention to the details, translate them from your reference to your hand, and do it in a meticulous way and constantly be adjusting as you're going along. You want to make sure that when you're looking back at your reference image that you're constantly checking these spaces. This space to this space, this space to this space. Hold your pencil up to the reference image. Don't change the size so those things remain the same between the two. And so as I'm going along, I'm noticing, you know, that my width, that this curve down here is a little too sloped downwards compared to my reference image. Like, this should be a straighter line. So I'm going to go back in with my lighter color. And those lashes, for the most part, they are going to be a lot watered down, so I don't need to adjust those yet. But I'm going to take my colored pencils and I'm going to adjust it a little bit higher. Because even though it's, you know, barely 2 millimeter difference, if I start that line downwards farther, it's going to keep getting wider and wider as I go down, and it is going to skew the entire photo. And so this is why we have to correct as we go along, and this is why we don't take shortcuts, and it's going to give you the most successful image that you could have. As I'm adding color to this section, if you're new to my work in general, and if you're new to this channel, go ahead and subscribe so that you can follow this series, and let me know if there's a particular subject or topic you would like me to cover. You can also follow me on Instagram if you want to see more images of the artwork that I create and other lifestyle stuff. I know a lot of people are home right now, and need something to take their mind off all of the stress that we're experiencing, because there is a lot of stress. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. And I'm going to go ahead. If you'll notice, like on this iris that starts out, it is not a perfect circle, and I mentioned this when we did this in black and white. And so we're just drawing how we see it. But even as it's not a hard line. It kind of, like this green color definitely fades out into the white, and then it kind of has it. Like this light green that I'm using now is just so that I can get that kind of overlaid look on the white of the eye. But then I'm going to take my darker, like olivey green, gold, bronze color and go ahead and kind of shade that into that lighter green I just laid down. Because there is that bright, very like hint of bright green that's like on the very outer edge of it. And then there's this darker, foresty kind of green that also is kind of like tucked in here. And like I said, if you zoom in, the one time you can zoom in is to really look at color. If it all looks like one tone to you from far away, which it generally does for the most part, if you zoom in on the individual parts, which I'll do in the video, you'll see that there's like a rainbow of colors in each of these areas, and you should be translating them. Again, if you don't have a massive color set, you can still use colors that would otherwise give you. If you notice there's a blue-green, take your base color green and add blue to it. If you know there's like a yellow-green, base layer green, add some yellow on top of it. There's always a way to achieve a color using a mixture of your basic, secondary, and primary colors. And I will show you by using some of these yellows and other spots. Like I am doing that as I go along. I don't just have a tone for every single shade that you could possibly have. I'm constantly blending colors into each other to get, I think I used like 20 different colors to get this shade in here, because I didn't have that exact shade in a color pencil. So you can constantly be doing that. Don't feel like you have to go out and spend a lot of money right now on these sorts of things. There are a lot of art stores that are having sales because of what's going on, and so take advantage of those, because I was seeing prices for stuff that would otherwise be a lot more expensive. And this is what I mean by there's so many different colors that make up, it's not really green, it's almost entirely like this olivey color, and then it's got hints of green and like this like outer edge, and like in the shine there's like some blue and green, and most of it's kind of like this bronzy yellowish color, and as you look at it from afar it looks green, and that's just due to all the different colors combined together and the colors that are around it. But they're definitely hazel eyes, so we're getting a lot of that yellowish tone. And you know, we're paying attention to our lines. Again, we're not going to go too far. We're not going to just do the whole iris before we also bring in these lines, because you don't want to keep doing the iris and then you find out it's like getting smaller as you go, and then your lid's going to be all messed up. So we're not going to go very far. We're just kind of going to work up to where the pupil is basically going to start. So as I'm layering in this greens, and you know, I'm going to use some blacks in some areas and some really dark browns, because there's definitely some, as we get to the top here, there's like little shines, but there's a lot of darkness, and we can see the reflection of the eyelashes. If you can't tell already, these same concepts that we did last time and what we're doing right now, by layering in the color, by just pulling out details and going step by step, is what we're going to do the entire time. And like I mentioned, it's not going to change depending on your subject. You're going to do everything the exact same way that we're doing it right now. And this is how I draw everything. It doesn't matter what I'm drawing. The same thing applies for anything that I'm doing. The crease shading over here is pretty dark and pretty wide out from the eye, and then it starts getting smaller as we get up here. And these are just, remember, like, don't fill in the blanks in your mind, just draw what you see, and you won't need to innately know that information. Like, it'll just come as you're going along in the photo. And we're still going to be doing each eyelash as we go as well. So we have our like ones that are kind of out of focus going towards the camera. If you notice that my strokes are a lot bigger than what you're comfortable with, like I'm doing like this whole lid at a time, shading back and forth. If you're, new to drawing, you're not as confident, this is why I made those videos that showed you that everything's just comprised of little lines, because you can really go in and break down each individual area and move along as you go. It'll give you the most accurate proportions too. If I did it, truly tiny section by tiny section, you're just going to get this super hyper realistic looking piece that's very accurate as a whole. And so we're just keeping that in mind as we're going, that, if I'm going a lot faster than you would, or I'm doing a larger section than you feel comfortable with, really take it as small at a section as you can. At this point, I want everyone to be on the same page with where we're at in this video process. I want everyone to feel just as confident. By the time we're done, if you're taking things slowly and you're tackling each little detail at a time, we should have very similar looking final results. It doesn't matter that I've been doing this as long as I've been doing it. I'm giving you insight into what it took me years to figure out on my own. That doesn't mean it took me years to be able to do it. I'm just going into some areas and adding, darker tones where I see them. Sometimes as you go farther along, you're like, okay, that could have been a little bit darker. Now that I'm seeing how dark this was kind of more darker than I thought it was when I was in that area. That's okay that not everything gets, you won't get everything right on the first go, on the first pass of any piece of art. I don't. So I'm always going back and just making sure that I'm revising as I'm going. It's never too late to change details about what you're doing. So just keep that in mind. We're not moving on. We're not doing an undersketch. We're really tackling each area as we go along. There's always going to be more detail. Like, I'm looking at it now, and I'm even noticing that that little vein that I drew in the black and white version of this that we did last time, I skipped over it this time. And these are small things that you wouldn't miss if you took it little section at a time, because they're obvious that they're there. It's not that I'm seeing something that you can't see. It's just about how much focus that you're putting into each area. I'm talking and obviously instructing as I go along, so I'm not paying as much attention. I'm kind of doing three things at once. I'm drawing, I'm looking at my reference, and I'm talking. But, if you're really truly paying attention to what you're doing, everything is obvious. Nothing's something that you wouldn't see any differently than I'm seeing it. So everybody has the potential. These shines in here, they're all pretty white right now, but if we're looking at them, they definitely have some blues, especially as we get closer to the pupil. So I'm going to add those blues in, and again, these are not details that I'm picking out because I'm superhuman. These are details that I'm just seeing because I'm paying closer attention to the image, and I'm copying those details down as I see them. For those that are new here potentially, and for those who are starting with this video potentially, it's not that this is the only way that you can draw, and that this is the method that I think is, the only way that people should be doing it, and that there's a right and a wrong way. Like I've stated before, it's just my personal approach to how I draw. I do think that from what I've seen and from what I've been able to do with other people, that this will get them farther in 3 lessons, because this is the 3rd video, than they would if they were starting, a more traditional route of doing just line work first, or starting, with shape, like just basic fundamental things, and getting all these steps together, when in reality, so if you really break down each little movement to their tiny micro, just little tiny, almost like you're drawing pixels at a time. Like each detail is just a little pixel. If you do things in that way, you shouldn't need these crazy techniques. Like doing a big line of shading, like how I was showing you, if we're breaking down a little eye, we're just adding almost like circles and dots at a time as we go along, but it might take different hand-eye coordination to do, a full blend like this. But as you could see in what we're just doing, at no point did I do that in this drawing. At no point did I sketch out a huge circle like the iris of the eye, and had to really focus on making sure that circle was because A, it's not a perfect circle, but B, I'm not trying to judge such a large area on my paper, and to eyeball it by looking at it and then doing the pupil and trying to do the shine all at once, because no matter what, I feel like that's going to be less accurate than tackling it one step at a time. So I'm not using like all these fundamentals that you might learn in an art class. Mind you, I might have started knowing this stuff, but I've found that this approach to drawing has been so much simpler for me. I think doing this half eye really illustrates the point the best that it can, that everything's about building out, and that, you know, there isn't a progression of like, this is the most finished, and then this is less finished, and then this is kind of finished. Like, everything is just tackling these little sections at a time. And I actually think it's really cool, and that's why a lot of my drawings, you'll see, like, I do drawings of like women that I'll have like really detailed portions of the body done, and then it kind of like tapers off into like kind of a sketchy thing. And that's what I mean about like knowing the rules and then being able to break them. Like, it's not to say that you need to finish the whole image to have something that's really cool, but just make sure the parts that you do are you know, as meticulous and as patient as you can do them, because it'll give you an overall more successful image. Each tiny detail, just as we go along. Even in the shine, there's some variation that I haven't included yet. There's like some of that bronzy color right here, and it kind of like goes up into here. One of the biggest notes I have for myself at this stage of the drawing, and again, this is why we're constantly checking our details and reassessing as we go along, is that, you know, the skin tone that I'm creating is overall paler than the image that I'm referencing. And so even though we're blending as we go, you can take another color that's darker or lighter and layer it kind of like an overlay on the skin tone that we've already created, and that'll give you sort of a darker effect. And it's similar to what you would do in Photoshop if you were going to be layering your colors. And then we go back in, and we still want to blend it out into the paper, so we take the side of the pencil if you really want that soft light blend. And so that's a lot closer to the skin tone of what we're looking at. And that's one of those details, like, I think I would normally catch sooner on if I was paying attention, but there's not to say that you won't get as far as I did before you realize, okay, this all could be a little bit darker, and that's okay. I just think it's better to notice these things as soon on as possible, because I'm still going to get all that variation in color that I've already created. I'm lightly going over the whole thing to make it darker. I'm not like trying to cover it up. I'm just trying to create like an overlaid effect on top. Rather than me rush through this entire eye to kind of give you the general idea of the concept, I just want to show you that if you keep working an area, you'll keep improving the realism factor to it. And that's just paying attention to those details. You're not creating something that's not there. You're just using your critical eye, looking at what you've done, and seeing if there are discrepancies with what you're looking at, if there are proportions that are accurate, if they're not, going along and fixing them. I'd rather get a more completed half of an eye right now than I would trying to get an entire eye that's maybe not as up to speed, just for the sake of being able to both draw and talk at the same time. It's not that this is necessarily a magical medium, it's just that I've spent a lot more time on this amount of detail than I did last time. So we always want to just be spending as much time as possible making sure we're completely happy with what we've created before we move on. And trust me, there's always more that you can add, there's always more that you can do. It's really just getting it to a point where even if you stand back from it and look at it, I tend to take pictures of what I'm doing in the process of it. So as you'll notice, I'll take a picture of what I'm doing, and if I, pull the picture away, look at it kind of with a new set of eyes. So when you put your phone directly over it and take a picture of it, you're changing the perspective, you're changing the focal length because you're using a different lens. You're looking at it very differently when you look at it through another screen, through a photograph. So I highly recommend doing that. I really, really hope that this tutorial has helped some of you unlock all of this potential. If you're reaching the end of this still feeling like you can't do what I just did, please watch my introduction to drawing video. Please watch the next video, because this is possible. Everybody can do what I just did if they take their time, and I'm really excited to keep exploring these concepts with you. If you have ideas for what lessons I can tackle next, please let me know in the comments. What's important is to note that this is possible for you. You don't have to go into this feeling like you're not as good as an artist as someone else that might be in your life or at people that you've seen online. Everything changes also based on people's editing. Some people digitally edit their photos of their drawings after they take them. Camera settings will also affect how something looks. So I'm going to go ahead and change now to show you, if I darken, you kind of see more of the shadows and it kind of looks like it has more depth to it. If I change the exposure and if I brighten it, you kind of lose some of that shading. And the same will go for like the kind of light that you're drawing in as well. If you're using a yellow lamp to draw, it's going to create a different sort of overall tint on the image. So when you take it into like daylight and you look at the reference you were using and then you look at your drawing, you might feel that the colors are off, and that could be the lighting that you're using. I use white LED lights. I'm using studio lights right now, so it's really giving me like a very clear image. My phone doesn't have any like night shift settings on it or any settings. It's just the image as bright as it can go, and all of these things affect your overall result. Don't feel inadequate. Don't feel like what you're doing isn't right. Don't feel frustrated if you're not getting this kind of clarity in your image by the end of what you're doing. I think what it comes down to is your confidence. I really hope that you enjoyed. If you did enjoy this video, please subscribe to my whole entire art lesson series, and you can follow me on Instagram at artistjodysteele. I also do body painting for those who don't know, and I post those videos as well on my channel and on Facebook. I'm artist Jody Steele on all platforms, including TikTok, and I really hope you enjoy it. I'm really excited to see everybody's results. If you post them, to Instagram or to your stories and tag me, I check for that stuff all the time. I'm really excited to see what everyone comes up with. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.